Okay. Well, good morning to those of you who are on the west coast of Canada all the way up into Ottawa. And for those of you going beyond that on the east side of Canada or North America, I say good afternoon to you. Welcome to the Dynamics CRM Portal session. Essentially what we're going to cover is the ADX Portal Studios and the Dynamics CRM Portal innovations that we've seen. Cover those and give you guys a couple good examples or case studies of what's going on out there in the industry today, and give you some objectivity on how to analyze, what kind of portal solution would you need, why do you need a portal solution, and what have you relating to this context and this topic. So just a little bit about who we are. We're ePerformance Inc., and specifically we're dealing with the ePerformance Training Academy, who brings to you all the webinars that we have on a monthly basis on a number of different topics. Essentially, as an organization, we specialize in the public sector software solutions based on CRM. So we do CRM solutions in grants management, contracts management, regulatory. We do CRM training courses and services, much like the webinar you're attending today. These are the sort of things that we do. We also do personalized training courses. Essentially, if you're looking for a solution in Dynamics CRM, I could sum up a lot of what we do is right from the point of inception to thinking about an idea of a solution or an enterprise solution that you need for different lines of business throughout your organization. We can conjure up the idea, we can take it through actually delivering the project itself, and then we can close that off with providing training to you, operations, hosting services, and the full gamut, right? So we're very in tune with what's going on in the public sector in general. And a lot of the learnings that we share in these webinars actually come from this. We're dedicated to the best practices in the public sector. In a lot of cases, we're influencing that directly with a lot of the work that we're doing. So we're Microsoft Gold partner, so we have a very strong relationship with Microsoft. And ADX is going through a bit of a merging process on the portal side, and we've become an ADX Studio partner as well. So very well fitted to address some of these new trends and topics that we want to cover in terms of case studies. So I'm the presenter today. I'll be taking you through and I'm seeing you through the first part of the session. Later on, that's myself, Devin Murphy, ePerformance. So I'm the manager of the training and consulting here at ePerformance, consulting relating to training. Later on, I'm going to have Brian speak to you and present to you an example of an ADX solution so that you guys can have that case study and have a good demo firsthand and ask questions about it later on in the presentation. So we're going to take a look at the agenda. We're first going to cover the very basic question, what are web portals? We're talking a lot about them. They're a big deal now, with Microsoft having purchased ADX. And what's the rationale? Why wouldn't you just use Microsoft Dynamics the way it is? After that, we'll take a look at what's out there. What are the available solutions? We'll come up with a way to categorize them and help you make an educated decision about what major direction you'd want to go to or go in if you're thinking about doing portal solutions. Afterwards, we'll take a look at two unique case studies. We'll look at one example of one category we'll discuss, which is ADX for government. And then afterwards, to conduct another case study, eServices for government. So we'll take a look at the two of those, see where they make sense. After that, we'll talk about some closing points and then open up the floor for people to ask questions. So just up front, if you do have questions at any point during the session, feel free to enter those into the chat window. What we'll do is we'll compile those at the end and then answer all the, if there's repeat questions or something to that effect. We'll be covering them all at the end. We'll also open the floor to myself, Brian, and we'll have an additional ADX expert consultant available to answer any questions with the best possible knowledge and most objectivity around how you should do portals or what have you. So let's start with the big question. What are web portals? What kind of tool or system are we really looking at here? What are we really talking about? Well, to sum it up, really, it's one single look and feel for multiple functions. If you look at the Amazons of today or the Googles of today, you have one set of login credentials, but you go and do multiple things when you log in with that account. You could even argue that maybe Facebook, the way that it operates, when you use the additional extended features that it has, or LinkedIn, when you use the extended features over and above just searching people's posts and feedback that you get, these start to look like portals. You take that information to the next level. Okay? So you often have the ability to log in with profile information, and that profile, that version of you in these solutions is carried across all these different lines of business, or let's say areas of function. It's a central mashup of different functions in one place. So for example, if we look at Microsoft Online, this is the latest example. If anyone here is used to seeing Office 365, you now have all of your Office applications in one place, and you're logged in with one profile. It's not just limited to Microsoft Online. For those of you who are using the Microsoft Dynamics tools, for example, those integrate. You have one login, and you can go into all these different applications, and they all in one way or another talk to one another or keep that profile information about yourself, and then they may even go beyond that and then talk, these different lines of business would be applications that talk with one another, right? So you're really starting to get that seamless experience through your browser of things that are going on within your web browser. So you could think of, and we've said it already, but that here I am, Mr. Devin Murphy with a profile in the center, and I have appointments, or I have chat or posts that are being made, emails maybe that I'm doing, mass communications, reporting that I'm doing, my stock information that I'm managing and constantly updating. This is what web portals do, and this is what they are. So what's the rationale? So why would we want to use? Why would we even think about web portals when we have this application called Dynamics CRM? It's web enabled. You can log onto it online, and you can technically do whatever you need to from wherever you need to do it. Well, it's not that straightforward, and we'll break down why. One of the biggest reasons why you'd want a web portal is licensing and access. Let's break that down in this scenario. So suppose you needed Dynamics to manage all of your external clients on the web. Well, let's just start with, before we talk about external clients, let's think about what's involved with your own internal users and what you do there. So here in this little diagram, I've got 3 users, where I have a small number, or a manageable number of units, a fixed number that I'm aware of or know of, that are logging into my CRM database. And we think about this as being internal, right? So CRM isn't just a database that we log into. There's an application you go to, and it talks to a database. But for simplicity's sake, let's just say we're accessing a database. We know how many users are here. We know they have access within our internal web. Let's talk about the external scenario. Well, right up front, who's accessing your site externally, right? This is no longer your intranet that you're operating on. This is something that's, let's say, publicly available. You do have credentials that you would log into, but even the way to set up people within Dynamics CRM requires some basic logistics. What's their username, their password, their email address? They all need to have that set up and synchronized to some extent. It's not to say that this isn't doable, but there's a logistic you have to think about. Now, that's if you know the fixed number of people. Suppose you have a pile of people, let's say hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or even millions logging into the system. How are you going to manage that the same way? Knowing who those people are and the scope of people that you would do that with might not work. So there are some successful implementations of using Dynamics CRM externally, and these are, good examples are if I'm an assessment organization and I work with universities, I have a fixed number. I fit that original use case. I have a fixed number of people. I know who they are, and I give them profile information to log in, and they can connect. Great. Second, I don't know who those individuals are. I don't have enough manpower to have the resources to interface with them, make sure that their accounts are managed and that they're logged in, or I don't have the support system to answer all their phone calls and triage them so that they can get users in here. I really fall outside of the scope of this. So there's reason number 1. Not to mention that the licensing costs for millions of users in Dynamics CRM starts to become quite exorbitant. We're dealing with hundreds, that's probably manageable, and licensing for Microsoft Dynamics can go anywhere from $200 a head per year to $1,000 per head per year, and it could even go beyond that if you have a lot of additional functions and features added, right? So it really comes down to, how are you using this tool, and is it going to be effective in this method? So who? That's the question. Who's getting in here? If I can't answer that question, okay, I immediately can't solve this problem this way. The next problem that we want to talk about is external interface for public as an external interface just on its own. So for instance, you don't want people accessing your internal database probably. And in most cases, that's a risk. If you have external people who are outside, in the public, who are not in some way paid by or directly invested in what your program or your public sector organization is doing, the data needs to be somewhere else. So the requirement where the internal is here Your external has to have its own database. Now, it's not to say you can't create a secondary Dynamics solution here, and this is done for different reasons, but the physical location and even the virtual location that goes with this database and a lot of requirements needs to be out here. We still haven't answered the who problem. We can at least get the database where we want it to be. But we're still having, over and above that, that's going to directly impact a database. So there's some security considerations that have to be made here when the information is transacted between these two different places. So this really starts to give us a couple of really strong points for, you know, why maybe CRM is in most cases not going to address what we need. And it really boils down to different core requirements. And we've listed some. So scope of access, who's accessing it, how many people are accessing it, and what means do they need to impact the data that we use internally with our own internal staff on our intranet. And then the physical and virtual location of data, and that has a lot to do with, you know, protected B status and associated requirements with that. Depending on your public organization, we're going to have different classification standards, but they all have the same idea of where the data should be located, both physically and virtually, and who are the people that are physical people who are actually managing or administering that information. Over and above that, we have something called design patterns. So we configure Dynamics CRM, and we love configuring it because it's a rapid development tool, and we configure it a certain way that makes sense to the user base we're addressing. If we're dealing with two completely different user bases, an internal user base and an external user base, we're going well beyond the scope of how this tool is designed to really edit it for these different experiences all the time. You can do it with security roles and what have you. However, we're really starting to hit a point where, okay, is there another tool to do this, or is just another way to look at this in just about every way? So this is there's a culture change in the business associated with this as well. These are all very good reasons to change, to think about other tools. Now that being said, there are some very helpful takeaways. Microsoft Dynamics does a lot of really, really good things and has an incredibly useful philosophy. Right? For those of you who have seen this slide before, essentially what we're saying here is when we look at, it's basically an argument against out-of-the-box solutions on the right-hand side here, what you buy. So this is your Microsoft Exchange or your Microsoft Office versus your build, where this is your .NET stack as a framework, or even your more basic development tools where you're building an environment. Where Microsoft sits is right in between. You give people an application platform where they can configure and do really rapid development, and you really close that need to do, let's say, core development in a lot of fronts. You're doing configuration, right? That all lends itself to that change in culture. You have business users who are now skilled enough to make changes to their application, so the requirements owners are the people sometimes making the changes, right? So that really rapidly innovates things. At least the people who are gathering the requirements, the business analysts, may be the ones making the changes on this. So all to say that different skill set now, more rapid development, and that philosophy is really great. It works for a lot of people, and this is a lot of the reason for, if you'll see success stories within Dynamics CRM, the reason why they get built so quickly is because of the resources you're able to utilize within your organization that you weren't able to before, and also because the development time comes down significantly. Over and above this philosophy, we know that Microsoft is continuing to add configurable features, and by nature of increasing the configurability of their applications, they're reducing, and they probably won't remove, but they're reducing the need for custom coding, right? So we know configuration continues to grow. This philosophy and the way that they approach it, how can we benefit from that, or how can we come up with a tool that's going to feed off that principle? And that walks us into what kind of available solution. So what is out there? So some of the major players in this environment are the ADX Portal, and we'll talk a lot about that and give examples of. There's Access CRM and the Portal connectors, which have the same kind of function, but they're different products. There's eServices, which has another different type of perspective, and then we have things like custom portals. These are all tools you can use that would work with CRM in one way or another. And the best way to really separate out how we can have a discussion on each one of them is to really categorize them in some way where we can make educated decisions about the way they set up with the infrastructure, about the way that they set up with the application of Microsoft Dynamics itself, and so forth. Well, come together and put together basically 3 categories where we can start having a discussion on this. I like to think of it as the Dynamics mirror, so a coupled version. So ADX Portal, for those of you who are familiar with the tool, the way that you configure it, the forms can be one-to-one with the entities that are in CRM, right? And similarly with the Access and Portal connector, they have the same kind of thinking or dynamic. You're mirroring Dynamics in a way, so it's very intuitive what the form from a data perspective is going to do. We then have things that are decoupled configurable portals. So our eServices works a lot like that. You can model it after Dynamics, however, it behaves a little bit differently, and I'll explain that a little later. WordPress is another example. It falls a little bit outside of the scope of Dynamics CRM, but it's another type of portal that you can configure which doesn't have a direct link in some way, shape, or form that models the Dynamics CRM database. Then over here we have custom applications. So would I want to develop a custom solution? Well, the thing about custom is that if you have a really good team, a really tenured team, and they really understand Dynamics really well, you can really do anything in there. However, once the knowledge falls outside of that group, you might be tanked based on documentation. You may be tanked on the language or the way they wrote things even, just to scale up on that. So we can't really have a great conversation about that. And as far as these first 2 categories are concerned, what we really want to have a look at is where the Dynamics CRM plays a role. So this first category, technically all these things fit into that box, but something like WordPress doesn't really fit into the category. eServices does, though. So we look at decoupled portals, which interface with Dynamics CRM. So now we have a stage for where we can have a conversation. So once again, when it comes to custom things, because it can really be anything and varies so vastly based on the skill set that you have, the ability to document, keep the corporate memory and knowledge moving forward, it's very hard to put our finger on that. So we're going to have to park that one and come back to it maybe in another webinar or something like that. So let's now have a discussion about coupled versus decoupled to Dynamics. What are the pluses, pros, and cons of using one or the other? We're being Switzerland in this case and really saying here are the things that you can do in both cases, and they make sense in different scenarios. So it's really just picking the thing that makes sense to your organization. So let's summarize that. So in the case of coupled, they're easy to use, and they're designed that way. They're designed to kind of model almost exactly, in some cases, what Dynamics CRM does, to the point of, in ADX, you're configuring the form in CRM. They use familiar tools and entities, right? They're playing right off the CRM Dynamics entities. So you know exactly what to expect from those forms when they get developed and published. And this allows for rapid implementation. And we'll see that. They're also portal interface ready for CRM. So they're built to be with Dynamics CRM. So they're going to do what you need them to right away. The cons that come with that, though, is whether it's physical, so you'll have a logical, or so let's say a notional and a physical entity upper limit depending on your implementation. So if you have a Dynamics Online, you have an entity upper limit of 300 entities. So you have a very physical limitation on the amount of forms you can do because you have a limitation on the entities. Notionally, if you have an on-premise solution of Dynamics CRM, when you scale up on entities, you're limited by the infrastructure that you're hosting that environment on. So it requires a little bit more effort on that side to bump up the resources to make that work. And budgeting for that might be a bit tricky at first once you start scaling up on forms, because you won't know how to budget for new entities and their creation. It has a shared database, so suffice to say, these solutions, they're coupled, which has its pluses, but if CRM goes down, so does your portal. So there needs to be a significant amount of redundancy on there in order to mitigate that risk. We'll note how you can do that. You can take a database for a coupled solution. You can actually, as we looked at in one of the examples earlier on, create another Dynamics CRM instance that's separate from your internal system. And if you do that, now you've mitigated that risk. So there's more than one way to, let's say, skin that cat, but that's one way. And it requires Dynamics to run, right? So really these two, they play off one another. If we look at decoupled solutions, the pros is that they can run autonomously. They don't need Dynamics CRM to be running in order to work. So they're inherently a little bit more reliable from that perspective. Not that you can't design your infrastructure to address it, just that as a nature of the way they're designed, then it doesn't require that. They have a segregated database as a result of that also. So what that does is if you have those protected B requirements, or you have certain requirements associated with where your application data should be versus where your internal CRM data should be, then this, by nature of the way it's designed, addresses that up front. Ideally, you should be able to get the best performance out of decoupled solutions. Because they're a separate solution, the way that you tune them is not forced to work with Dynamics in the way that it has its structure. So you should be able to get a wee bit better performance from that. And form lifecycle, I will drill down on what this means, because what ADX does really well is it can link forms together, but there's certain context and certain use where in a decoupled solution it goes a little bit beyond that. So we'll take a look at what that is and see where that starts to make sense. Right? These are good examples where decoupled start to make sense in different scenarios. The cons are you're going to need to learn a new tool with a decoupled solution, right? So it's not going to be there's a less of a learning curve in comparison with a coupled solution because it buddies up with Dynamics CRM. So the assumption is you have that skill set and you're building on it. The segregated database, although it's a plus, that may actually be a detriment depending on how it's designed, because it may not communicate very well with the Dynamics CRM database, right? So it is a consideration. You need to think about what's the communication schema. And it may need a portal interface built for CRM. So in case of WordPress, for example, you would need to build the whole interface. So at this point, now that we've talked about coupled and decoupled, we're in a position where we can start to have a conversation about a demonstration or a case study on a coupled solution, and then afterwards we'll talk about a case study and demonstration on a decoupled solution, and compare them at the end and close out. So at this point, we're going to take a look at the ADX Portal. And for this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the floor over to my associate, Brian Murray here, and let him start talking and driving. So over to you, Brian.
Excellent. Thanks, Devin. And thank you all for attending today. I really appreciate your interest in the topic today. I think is pertinent in a lot of market areas, particularly in the public sector. As Devin mentioned, I'm with Microsoft as their ADX Studio sales lead for the organization. Let me give you a little history back, and Devin, you can advance the slide here too if you want. So ADX Studios was purchased last fall by Microsoft, but a little history before that was we've been, as a company, in the marketplace of developing CMS and portal systems for the last 15 years. And over that time, we built a lot of expertise about website development and particularly portal development. And with CRM version 4 from Microsoft, actually re-platformed our solution to work exclusively and inside of Dynamics CRM. So with that, we've kind of been the go-to solution for a long time for Microsoft in the commercial sector of their business as well as in the public sector. And with increased demand and interest from the marketplace for portals to be part of their company's overall CRM solutions, Microsoft acquired us and are in the process of rolling us into their offerings. Today, we're still sold as a separate product within the Microsoft family, but with the spring release of Dynamics CRM online, we will be a portal solution that can be purchased along with your CRM application. And you'll see our features and capabilities to continue to grow as part of the Microsoft family. So I want to talk today a little bit about our portal solution and some of the capabilities and give you an idea of what we've built from a feature set standpoint, as well as talk through specifically our government solution and even do a little demo of one of our clients' solutions that is public facing and would give you a good idea of what we can do. But generally, from a high level, people, stay back on that first one, if you would for a minute, Devin, sorry. Generally, people are looking at portals to provide self-service capabilities out to their constituents. And to execute a portal, to put a portal in, it requires some very specific features to be added to your implementation of CRM. When you purchase CRM, it's very much an internal-facing solution that your internal employees can use for call center type needs, for better servicing their constituents through better systems. But to really self-serve your customers, you need a portal attached to that. And when you do that, there's a number of things that have to be taken into consideration. First, authentication and profile management. That's kind of the first thing that people want in a portal, is the ability for people to have secure login and authentication methods. So we've built that into the solution, as well as being able to manage their own profile, their name, their address, information about their own record. We attach all of this to the contact record in CRM. So we use that as our portal user record and authenticate and manage the profiles against that. Then in a portal, you want to be able to configure and create applications. So we are very much an open tool that allows you to use your skills that you've developed in implementing dynamic CRM, things like building and creating forms through the configuration tools in CRM, the ability to create list views and advanced finds. We allow you to do that all within CRM and then expose that information out to the portal through our tool. Integrated content management. There are aspects of information that you want to be able to communicate to your constituents just through content. So the big plus here is that we do have a content management system out of the box. So you don't have to build that or build upon a contact management system in the marketplace, but you can choose to use ours within the portal. A lot of people have a main website and then just use our tool as a portal aspect to that, but many customers use us for all of their content and portal activities to their constituents. With that, some of the features that we really have that people like is the forums and discussion groups, so that you can communicate with your constituents and have that ongoing discussion out there. The last two are really around the website design, custom branding, and responsive design. So we do allow you to use tools. We use Bootstrap as our standard skinning and branding tool that give you that custom look and feel of your website, and also out of the box provides responsive design. So regardless of the device that your constituents might be connecting from, whether that's their PC, a tablet, or a smartphone, and regardless of what browser they might be using, our solution can adapt to that and respond to the design of that device. With our solution, we've also delivered a number of starter templates, or starter portals we call them, that provide some out-of-the-box functionality to get customers started in a solution. We have a number of these for the commercial side of our business, things around community, customer help desk, and partner portal type applications, but we also have some in the government space that we'll talk about today. So the key areas that we deliver functionality for through those portals is around citizen services, and this will be our use case today of non-emergency service type requests that you can extend out through self-service. Another big one is permits, licensing, and grants. So applications where you need to fill out a form to provide documents or documentation to a permit or license, all of that is easily built within our solution. Emergency management is another one. The County of San Diego, for example, uses our solution for their emergency management when forest fires hit the area. So it's a separate site that has a lot of scalability so that when forest fires do hit the area, they will have millions of hits against that database looking for updated information. So looking for a map to see where the flare-ups are, a map of where traffic and road closures are occurring, as well as forms to apply for grants and assistance if their home or their property was affected by the fire. So that's a good example there. And then just overall social engagement platforms for your constituents. So one example, like I mentioned, of citizen services that we want to talk through is one of our customers in the U.S., in Florida. Hillsborough County. It's the county that surrounds the Tampa, St. Petersburg area of Florida. And they came to us looking for a solution to provide more productivity and scalability with their internal staff in dealing with citizen requests, so that staff wouldn't have to be spending their time on the phone, taking service requests, or giving people updates on their service requests, but that would all be accessible through a web portal for their customers to be able, or their citizens to be able to look up themselves. So it was a rapid implementation. We did it in less than 12 weeks, and they were up and running on CRM and our portal solution. Lowered their total cost of ownership across the board, allowed them to lower their staffing increases and headcount, future headcounts, as a result of being able to transition people from call centers to other jobs within the organization. And has a lot, it really took advantage of our framework, both from a configuration standpoint and a design standpoint. So with that, let me show you their site, and I may, if I have time, show you another site similar that would allow you to get an idea of some of the capabilities of our product. All right, so this is they call it their 24/7 at your service site, and as they launched this, they did a lot of PR out to the community to educate them and start directing them to this site for all non-emergency services. So as you can see, it's got a nice look and feel to the site. You can see a map that they've integrated into the system to allow you to see where previous requests have been logged, so that you don't have to log redundant type requests. And here you can see, based on those requests in the map, all the different requests that have been submitted along with their location. So if I can zoom into my own neighborhood, I can see here that there was a mosquito request that was made to come in and take care of probably some standing water that was causing some issues in the area. But as you can see, there's all kinds of different requests. And all of this is logged from the website or internally, all into the same database, and is all accessible to the internal employees, so that when they see these services requests, they can also act on those within CRM. I don't have access to their CRM system, so I won't be able to show you that, but imagine that, you know, as these requests come in, they're actually finding their way into a CRM system for somebody to manage and act upon. So let's open up one so that you can see how that might proceed through a process. So let's imagine that we do have a mosquito in the backyard. Being from, I'm based in Minnesota, where we have mosquitoes, probably like you guys do up in Canada, so it seems a little ridiculous that you would report a mosquito, but maybe it's a bigger deal in Florida than it is here. But with this is a CRM form that's exposed out to this web portal, and I can enter information into the form. I can have required fields in there. As you can see, the address line is required. In the background, there is a product or a service that's running that will convert this address into latitude and longitude so that it can be placed on a map. I'm not going to do that right now. I won't actually submit this, or they'll really be confused. I can, that I'm reporting a mosquito in the backyard in Minneapolis, but we'll go through it anyway. I can select a date. I can enter more details. I can even attach a file. So imagine if you're on especially on a smartphone type device, I could actually at this point take a picture of this mosquito if I can get it to slow down long enough, or whatever the request might be. A pothole is a good example where oftentimes you want to take a picture so they can see how big this pothole is in the middle of my street, and come and react to that. So I can attach, and then I can submit this request. At that point, it goes into the system. You gets logged with a case number, and a workflow fires in CRM to send that case number to you via an email. I can also create a login and sign in to the portal. And at that point, I can go in and see what the status of those individual requests are that I may have made. And again, do self-service rather than call to see what the status of that information is. So all of this is set up inside CRM. These forms are just configured forms in CRM. In that map, it was just a different rendering of the data in CRM onto a map. And as you can see, all these icons and such just open up different forms that I can use with different fields that I might need to be able to fill in data with to be able to submit that request. So whether this is a citizen request, maybe it's an application, maybe it's a help desk request, all of these capabilities are easily built within our solution using the tools within CRM. I'll just show you another site, also in Florida, that just went live with the same type of idea of being able to track service requests and have those logged within the system. The city of Doral is the client here. Here they have, beyond just the service requests, you can also go in and ask for permits and set up reserve, parks and pavilions and such within the system. And like the Hillsborough one, this solution is all built within our content management system as well. And so that the look and feel of the site is all built using the tools that we provide as part of the solution to do that. So that's an overview of one way to utilize our application. And here you can see even the council meeting agendas is just a form in CRM. It's required fields that you subscribe, and then you're on a newsletter list in CRM. So a couple examples. Hopefully that gave you some ideas about ways you could use a portal for self-service to your constituents. And with that, I'll turn it back to Devin to talk through some of the other options that he has around portal solutions.
Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate that. Okay. So the next case study that we want to have a look at is eServices, and what we want to talk about briefly, and I even think that some of the folks on the phone may actually be from Canadian Heritage, so it'll be interesting for them to hear our perspective on how this tool is working out. What I will say is this is a case study on where it's progressed to so far, and then also we talk about eServices features in general that are either in production in other environments that might be of note or of use to organizations like yourselves having attended the session. So first off, the case study for Canadian Heritage scope is what really makes the case for eServices instead of ADX. So as Brian pointed out, there's a lot of really must-have portal functionality and multi-line of business sort of submission. But what if you need submissions that talk to one another in very, very complex scenarios and need to reuse forms in a very, very broad perspective? Well, Canadian Heritage sort of fits that mold a lot better. So we're talking about 500 staff with 24 programs, and suppose you only had 2 or 3 forms for every program, the volume starts to get pretty high. So we're talking, at least 75 forms, and probably in the future even more than that, right? It could be hundreds. And they deliver about $1 billion into grants and contributions, that's what G's and C's stands for, through about 9,000 cases annually. They began implementing a modernization project in 2012. I think this is a key thing, and this is something that, particularly in Canada, if we look at the Ontario government as a wider case study beyond this, and federal government in contrast, what a lot of the federal government projects are doing very right is they're looking at modernizing their business before looking at this, because of the absolute multitude associated with putting in so many forms and so many programs together. This is where the modernization project in advance of this really makes sense. And then at the end of that, you're going to find out what the scope is that you're dealing with and figure out what type of solution, portal solution, really makes sense for your business. They redesigned their workflow for file processing, and then in conjunction with the way that they reduce their file processing, in addition to modernizing and putting their forms online, they're reducing their file processing time by about 25%. Now, some of that lent itself to the way that we put together forms. So up to 80% of the data and grant programs came from the submission forms. And there's a lack of standardizing increases the administrative burden and limit. And what that does is, I'm just reading some of the comments as they're coming up. The lack of standardization increases administrative burden and limits really good reporting, right? So you're putting a lot of time instead of entering in data rather than analyzing the data. And certainly in Dynamics CRM or any new big data tool out there, you want to be focused on taking that data and making it information. If I might borrow from that whole concept. So a lot of how this is done, how this gets optimized over time, is by using a couple concepts that are very unique to eServices. And this is the concept of a form and section libraries. You might notionally have this idea. If I use an address, I want the address to look the same everywhere and reuse it everywhere. In a portal, when you want to talk to CRM, though, if you used ADX, for example, you may not be able to just have an address entity, and that might be full stop for you. You might need to create several address entities with different iterations of those fields. But in the database, you'd want it to feed the same entity. So when you hit that scenario, this is where you might need something like a form library or something to that effect. And in my example, I talked about section, but you could do that at the form level too. If you have a tax form that you want to fill out, there's a certain scope in which that needs to be modeled in a way that you can reuse it. And so what starts to happen here is you can have multiple different sections feeding the same entity, or you could have the same section feeding different entities, multiple entities. You can have that many-to-many relationship with your database based on the way that you can configure it. So your programs start to have unique sets of forms, and there's a standardization that goes into each of the forms and each of the individual sections that put that together. So lots of flexibility, scalability, but at the same time, you have that standardization process that you need. So, I mean, of course, forms aren't the only game that PCH is dealing with. They have a number of other features that are worth noting. I think a lot of these things, you know, aren't deciding factors, though, between whether you'd want to consider whether you're going with an ADX solution or you're going with an eServices solution. The ones that are of note would really be, you know, government features like secure key or the submission lifecycle. These are things that start to, you know, let's say, highlight a little bit more the differences, right? So, for example, if we look at form life cycles, so if we look at a simple life cycle, this is actually something you could do, you know, in ADX. If you reuse the same form, you're able to get your standardization down to one agreement and one progress report for the whole scope of your programs. This would work really well in ADX. You could have an application, you could submit the agreement, you could feed information from the application to the agreement, you could feed the agreement to the progress report. Where it gets a bit trickier, and it's not to say that you can't do it, but let's say the effort goes up exponentially, is where you want to have program 1, program 2, and program N, however many that you're going to have. And then they all have different applications, they all have different agreements, and they all have different progress reports. This is where you need that kind of mechanism that shares between these enough to standardize, but you're really looking at the Pareto law where, you know, there's 80% that's common, and there's 20% that's different. So not quite the Pareto law, but if you like the 80-20 rule and you like those numbers, you know, that there's a lot of thinking associated with that. You can really only standardize probably about 80%. So this is where, you know, eServices starts to reuse things that are common in a common database and allows you to be different, where you just can't get buy-in from all the business users. And just at the scale of forms that you'd need to implement, you wouldn't even have time to, even if you could. Over and above that, in the different eServices solutions that we provided over the years, they're very government ready, right? So within the federal government, we have different code sets which will do GC key. There's more than one type of GC key implementation. We do a few of them. RDIMS and GC docs, there are different implementations of those as well. We do have samples of RDIMS solutions and GC doc solutions where you can interface with those. We have different bilingual solutions where we handle both context and content. So for those of you who are familiar with that, you know, context, you know, if I wanted to say it quickly, defining the labels and how those translate, and then content is what actually somebody puts in. So having a way to address that both from an external user perspective and from an internal user proactive disclosure support. So this maybe lends itself a wee bit to content, right? So you can display information or the results of information in both official languages. Having FIPA and ATEP compliance, so depending on whether you're from Ontario government or you're from the federal government, having the compliance of access to information is really what we're talking about here. For the Ontario folks, if you're using their transfer payment solutions, you need to interface with those systems. We have examples of code that'll work with that and talk very well with that, both in ingoing and outgoing transactions. And the idea is that this solution is ultimately using WET4 under the hood. So it's really, it's prepped and it's there to kind of be compliant right from the get-go, right? So you're kind of using that bootstrap to make sure that, you know, you're meeting either the AAA compliance or the AA compliance, depending on, you know, how much you want to trade off user experience versus being compliant. So now what I'm going to do is, I don't have the time per se to actually walk through a demo of the solution, but what I will do is I'll walk you through some high-level screenshots and talk about where these salient points really fall into the solution that's there. So in terms of GC key setup, we have a way to do that. So you can set up the portal, you pick in the GC key login or the partner login, and that's going to bring you into the site. So there we go, we can do that. Once you've logged into the system, you're going to have a sample login page. And this is where we really open up the door to what you're going to do when you pick the My Applications option up here, and you want to navigate to a specific program. This is actually sort of the way that ADX kind of puts things together. So the program and lifecycle, we can have a list of programs. The difference is that one program or set of programs in our case might represent the child or breakdown of one of the major boxes that you'd look at on an ADX portal. So you might have one thing called grant programs. You click on grant programs, and now you're at the next drill down stage where you can pick the program of granting that you want to go ahead with. Once you've picked that, where the life cycle starts to really feed in is where you can have that scalable set of several forms across several programs using standard things, right? So here's our process. Here's a table of a user who's logged in, who's completed a few different forms, has a few progress and interim reports pending in different programs. So these are all linking to each other with those standard forms across those different areas. And then just as a point about if we opened up a form individually, one of these forms, suffice to say, anything you see on this form is configurable completely. So the content here, the styling, you can put in a style sheet that would fit the Government of Canada, for example. And then after that, you can figure out what fills out on your menu, which one's going to drive your applications. If there's one you want to drive your program, you could do that. Service request, user preferences, so a lot of features and function. And the labels that show up in this menu are configurable. Every section and every field on every form are configurable and with conditional rule sets, right? So, you know, hide or show or lock or unlock this field based on this condition. We have subgrids, so where you want to do inline editing on financial details. Those sorts of things are available too. So a little bit more portal functionality, but more so the process-driven lifecycle and the scalability of that is really where we're starting to separate the two. So in the future, as you can see that there are some dovetails between these two applications. And we noticed this in ADX, we've been in contact with them, and something you might expect in the future would be combining these two. So if we would be looking at a future integration for those of you who are interested, that actually is going to work with ADX Studio and eServices. Because we have that one little box for grants management or contract management or loans management. We do that really well, that process really well. ADX manages the higher level from that portal interface or control really well. So we're being social and saying, you know what, it does that really well in those scenarios. We want to be using ADX. And in the other scenarios where a lot of our government clients are doing grants management or contract management or heavy forms lifecycle management, we want to be using our tools. So let's put them together and we can address those requirements as they are appropriate. And the end result is going to be that this looks the same on the surface, but it's what's on, I'm going to have a sentimental point here, it's what's on the inside that counts. So in conclusion, you need to make a decision based on the architecture. And when I say architecture, I say that from a business architecture perspective and a technical architecture perspective. So we want to take a look at coupled versus decoupled solution, and you want to just pick the one that meets your requirements. When we're talking about ADX, Microsoft has purchased it because it's a best of breed for coupled solutions. So there are other solutions. That's the one it's going with. It's going to be in their offering. If you're looking at other coupled solutions, by all means do so, but you should not pass this up. You should have a very close look at it first, because you're going to be in alignment with the next set of versions coming out in Dynamics CRM. If you're in the more complex process solution and you're using Dynamics to do your forms management and that sort of thing, you're in the federal government or Canadian government somewhere and you're looking for that heavy compliance piece and those key interfaces, you know, eServices is a unique option that's very good for decoupled solutions, right? It connects really well with the Dynamics database also. If you need both, well, you can reach out to me after this and I'll keep you posted on the updates and the progress that we make as an organization to really merge these two features and get the best of both worlds. With that, I'll turn it over to questions. Okay, I see a couple questions that are available here, and that's from Bill Main. So it's just a point on there's 24 programs for PCH, but this translates to several components per program, and then even more individual grants and contributions. So when we talked about 100 forms, it may even be thousands. 100 forms per year, maybe. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending the session. Feel free to reach out to me on any questions you may have following up on ADX. Thank you for your time.